please. I know you don't know me, but could you spare a ride? Just to the main road. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. The rain fell in sheets, turning the November evening into a wall of gray water. 23-year-old Ember Calloway sat in her 15-year-old Honda, engine running, watching a figure stumble along the muddy shoulder of Route 47. She'd just left her evening shift at the diner, her third job alongside art school and weekend gallery work, and every instinct told her to keep driving. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Don't pick up strangers, honey. The world's not safe." But something about the way the man moved, shoulders hunched against the storm, limping slightly, utterly alone, made Ember's foot hit the brake before her brain could object. She pulled over, rolling down the passenger window just enough to be heard over the downpour. The man approached cautiously. He was probably in his early 30s, wearing an expensive suit now completely ruined by mud and rain, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes, even in the dim light, carried a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. "My car broke down about 2 miles back. Phone's dead. I've been walking for 40 minutes. Ember hesitated only a moment before unlocking the door. "Get in before you drown out there." He collapsed into the passenger seat, water pooling immediately on her worn floor mats. "I'm Corbin," he said quietly, "and you're either very kind or very foolish to stop for someone like me in this weather." "Maybe both," Ember replied, pulling back onto the empty road. "I'm Ember. Where are you headed?" "Honestly, I don't even know anymore," Corbin said, and something in his voice suggested he wasn't just talking about the drive. What Ember didn't know was that Corbin Ashwell was one of the wealthiest men in the state, CEO of Ashwell Pharmaceuticals, a company worth billions. What she also didn't know was that 3 hours earlier, he'd walked out of his glass office tower in the middle of a crucial board meeting, gotten in his car, and just driven, trying to outrun the emptiness that had been consuming him since his wife left 6 months ago, taking with her any illusion that success could fill the void his parents' deaths had left 10 years before. His car breaking down in the middle of nowhere felt almost poetic, a man who controlled an empire, utterly helpless in a rainstorm. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers and rain hammering the roof. Finally, Ember spoke. "You look like you've had the kind of day that makes you question everything." Corbin let out a hollow laugh. "Is it that obvious?" "I recognize the look," said Ember softly. "I see it in the mirror pretty often. That feeling like you're working so hard just to stay afloat, and you're not even sure why you're bothering anymore." Corbin glanced at her, really seeing her for the first time, paint-stained fingers gripping the steering wheel, dark circles under her eyes, a sadness around her mouth that spoke of dreams deferred and responsibilities shouldered too young. "What are you running from?" he asked. "I'm not running from anything. I'm running toward something I'll probably never reach. I'm an art student, but I work 3 jobs to help my mom with rent and her medication. She got sick 2 years ago. Nothing life-threatening, just chronic and expensive. My dad left when I was 12. I paint when I can, which isn't often, and I keep telling myself someday it'll matter. Someday someone will see my work and it'll mean something." "Do you believe that?" Corbin asked quietly. Ember's hands tightened on the wheel. "I have to, because if I don't, then what's the point of any of this?" The raw honesty in her voice cracked something in Corbin's carefully constructed armor. Here was someone who had every reason to be bitter, to harden herself against the world, yet she'd still stop to help a stranger in the rain. "Can I ask you something?" Corbin asked. "Why did you stop for me? You don't know me. I could be dangerous." Ember was quiet for a moment, then said, "My mom always taught me that kindness is the only thing we truly own. Money can be lost, success can disappear, people can leave, but choosing to be kind, that's something no one can take from you. I stopped because I want someone to stop for me." They reached the main intersection, streetlights glowing through the rain like watercolor halos. Corbin should have thanked her and gotten out, called his assistant, returned to his controlled, lonely life. Instead, he heard himself say, "There's a coffee shop about 3 blocks from here. Still open, I think. Could I buy you a cup of coffee, as thanks?" Ember hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, I could use the warmth." The coffee shop was nearly empty, just a tired barista wiping down tables. They sat in a corner booth, steam rising from their cups, and for the next 2 hours they talked, really talked, not the surface pleasantries of networking or the careful dance of first dates, but the kind of honest conversation that happens when 2 strangers realize they have nothing to lose by being real. Corbin learned that Ember painted cityscapes at dawn because that's when the world felt most hopeful. That she'd sold exactly 3 paintings in 2 years, each for barely enough to cover supplies. That she felt guilty pursuing art when her mother needed her practical support, but felt like she'd die inside if she gave it up completely. Ember learned that Corbin had built his company from the ground up after his parents died in a car accident, pouring his grief into work because it was easier than feeling. That his wife had left him because, in her words, living with a ghost is lonelier than living alone. That he couldn't remember the last time he'd done something just because it made him happy. "You know what's strange?" Ember said, cradling her second coffee. "Everyone probably looks at you and thinks you have everything figured out, and everyone looks at me and thinks I'm failing, but we're both just lost. Maybe being lost together is better than being lost alone," Corbin said quietly. Something shifted in that moment. Not romance, but recognition. 2 people who'd been performing their lives for so long they'd forgotten what authenticity felt like, finding unexpected refuge in honest conversation. When they finally left the coffee shop, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Corbin called a car service, then turned to Ember before it arrived. "Can I see your paintings sometime?" he asked. "I'd like to understand what you're fighting for." Ember smiled, tentative but genuine. "They're not very good." "I don't care about good," Corbin said. "I care about real." A week later, Corbin showed up at the tiny studio Ember rented in a converted warehouse. She'd been terrified he wouldn't come, then terrified he would. But when he arrived, he simply stood before her canvases, raw, emotional pieces that captured the beauty and struggle of urban life, and was silent for a long time. "These are extraordinary," he finally said, "not because they're technically perfect, but because they make me feel something. When's the last time you showed these publicly?" "I can't afford gallery fees," Ember admitted, "and the few places that have shown my work, nobody came." What happened next, Corbin would later recognize as the first genuinely selfless thing he'd done in years. Not a business calculation or networking opportunity, but a pure desire to help someone who'd shown him kindness when he needed it most. He owned a building downtown, prime real estate he'd been planning to convert into luxury condos. Instead, he transformed the ground floor into a gallery space and gave Ember her first solo exhibition, covering every cost, inviting not just wealthy collectors, but art students, working people, anyone who wanted to experience beauty. "Why are you doing this?" Ember asked the night before the opening, overwhelmed and disbelieving. Corbin met her eyes. "Because you stopped in the rain when you had every reason to keep driving. Because you reminded me that success without humanity is just expensive loneliness. Because your art deserves to be seen, and kindness deserves to be answered with kindness." The exhibition was transformative, not because Ember sold every piece, though she sold several, but because she was finally seen. Critics praised her raw emotional honesty. Other struggling artists found hope in her story. And Corbin, standing in the crowded gallery watching Ember glow with pride and possibility, felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose beyond profit. Months later, Ember's mother's health stabilized with proper treatment Ember could finally afford.
Ember reduced her jobs to one, poured herself into her art, and began teaching free workshops for kids who couldn't afford art supplies. And Corbin quietly restructured his company's charitable giving, focusing on supporting artists and creators who needed a chance. They remained close friends, two people who'd met at their lowest points and helped each other find their way back to hope. Not through grand gestures, but through simple, sustained kindness. One rainy evening, exactly a year after their first meeting, they sat in that same coffee shop. Ember raised her cup in a small toast. "To stopping in the rain," she said softly. Corbin smiled, the sadness finally gone from his eyes. To stopping in the rain, and remembering that the most valuable things we can offer each other cost nothing at all. Because kindness is never about what we have, it's about what we're willing to give when we see someone struggling in the storm. It's about choosing connection over convenience, humanity over fear, and believing that small acts of compassion can change everything. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.